I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.
Hello there, Price of Reason here with a movie review. For those who don't know, I've always been a big fan of the 1984 movie Ghostbusters, which I consider to be not only one of the best movies of the 1980s, but also one of the top 100 movies ever made. It's a movie that during the time of its release, managed to combine different genres together, such as comedy, horror, and science fiction, and present them in a way that felt fresh and new, creating its own unique and different subgenre in the process. Led by a talented director and featuring some iconic actors in their prime, the original Ghostbusters movie was truly a case of lightning in a bottle, with the film being even greater than the sum of its parts. And due to how much I like that original movie, I'm always happy when a new movie within the Ghostbusters franchise comes out. Of course, with the exception of that stinky Ghostbusters 2016 movie, which isn't considered canon, so it doesn't really count. Anyhow, this week, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the latest entry within the franchise, has been released, and I've already seen it. In this video, without spoiling anything that hasn't already been shown in trailers, I'm going to be discussing the general plot of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, what I liked about the movie, what I didn't like about the movie, followed by my official score. Frozen Empire picks up a few years after the events of the previous movie, Ghostbusters Afterlife. Spengler's daughter and grandchildren, along with Paul Rudd, are now working as a family, busting ghosts together in New York City after Winston Zeddemore gives them the keys to the old Ghostbusters firehouse facility from back in the day. Everything seems to be going well for them, but it turns out that Walter Peck from the original movie, who is now the mayor of New York City, is unhappy about the property damage that the Ghostbusters are causing, and as usual, is actively looking to take down their operation. After an incident that draws the mayor's attention, it's decided that Phoebe Spengler, who is a minor, will no longer work with her family as they bust ghosts, putting her in somewhat of a slump. This causes her to go down a path that eventually leads her to a new ghost that's introduced to us in this movie. As seen in commercials, this ghost freezes people and objects and is now considered a major threat that could potentially destroy New York City and also the entire world. So it's up to the Ghostbusters, old and new, along with some additional characters introduced in this film, to stop this evil ghost, and ultimately this movie plays out pretty much how you'd expect a Ghostbusters movie to play out, eventually bringing this story to a logical conclusion. Let's start with what I liked about the movie. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is an acceptable entry within the Ghostbusters franchise. It balances between callbacks to previous movies, while at the same time, it also creates a new threat that has to be dealt with. It respects its overall mythology and lore. It also doesn't come off as preachy or agenda-driven, but rather focuses on escapism, ghosts, and a bit of humor. Unlike with more recent Disney franchise movies, this movie never feels like it has contempt for its audience, or that it's trying to lecture anybody, and overall, much like Afterlife, this movie is rather wholesome, and is more than suitable as a family-friendly movie. If you like seeing the OG cast members, I think that this movie gives them much more to do than what we saw in Afterlife, which is an overall plus. Dan Aykroyd as Ray has some great moments in this. Bill Murray is a little more present here than in Afterlife, although I still wish we would have seen more of him. It's always nice to see Annie Potts as Janine, but honestly, I think that the MVP of the OG actors here is Ernie Hudson. At 78 years old, Hudson not only looks about 20 years younger than his actual age, he acts about 20 years younger too, bringing a lot of enthusiasm to his role, which I was happy to see, especially in Hudson's joint scenes with Dan Aykroyd, which really gave a throwback type of feel. As far as the Spenglers and Paul Rudd go, I think these characters are once again likable enough in their roles. And newcomer Kumail Nanjiani provides some decent enough comic relief in a rather minor supporting role. However, even though there were things that I liked about the movie, it's far from being perfect, as it does have a considerable amount of issues. The biggest one being an unnecessarily overbloated cast. While I like the characters of Lucky and Podcast in Afterlife, their inclusion within this movie feels rather forced, especially with the Spenglers now living in New York. As a result, screenwriters Gil Kanan and Jason Reitman don't seem to know what to do with them, so there's always a feeling that they're just wasting precious screen time in an already somewhat convoluted story. It also doesn't help that the movie introduces additional new characters such as Lab Guy and Patton Oswalt, both of which could be deleted from this movie and it would actually improve it. And the real shame here is that by having so many characters involved in the story, there isn't enough time to really build up some key character relationships and develop the more emotional moments of the movie. A lot of stuff just seems to happen in the movie because the script needs it to, but at times, it all just feels too clinical. I strongly believe that with at least one more draft of this screenplay, many of these problems could have either been easily resolved or avoided altogether. So while Frozen Empire's heart may be in the right place overall, Afterlife as a movie had a lot more heart, which is why Frozen Empire is inferior to Afterlife, and quite honestly, inferior to any other canonical Ghostbusters movies we've seen to date. With that being said though, it's not unwatchable or infuriating, it just falls short of how good it could have been. Also, to address the elephant in the room that some people have been talking about, there is an ambiguous relationship between two female teens in this movie that appears to imply an underlying romance of sorts. While its presence is rather odd and hard to ignore, ultimately, it doesn't negatively affect the movie, but if it ever turned out that perhaps a few scenes alluding to it were ultimately cut out of the movie, I wouldn't be shocked about that as well. To be honest, it's not even something that I especially care about, it's just with all of Hollywood's ongoing preaching and lecturing, I think people's radars are just a bit more sensitive these days to this kind of stuff, for good and for bad. It also doesn't help that a new teen actress that is introduced in this movie seems like she just finished doing some ill-advised TikTok challenge or something. Still, on the bright side, Frozen Empire is a legitimate Ghostbusters movie. With all of its flaws, it's a fun time at the movies, especially if you're a fan of Ghostbusters, even if it ultimately ends up being the most forgettable entry in the franchise. I also think that people that especially enjoyed the old animated Ghostbusters series back in the day will likely have a more positive opinion than me about Frozen Empire, as it really tries to capture some of that animated series atmosphere. Personally though, I like it when live-action Ghostbusters is live-action Ghostbusters, so I don't necessarily see that as an advantage. If I had to give this movie a score, I suppose I would give it a 70 out of 100. In comparison, I would give Ghostbusters 2 and Afterlife a 75 out of 100, and the first Ghostbusters movie a 90 out of 100. So at the end of the day, Frozen Empire is a flawed movie, but if you like Ghostbusters, you're likely to at least find it somewhat enjoyable, and it's probably worthy of seeing in a movie theater. If you're more of a casual Ghostbusters fan, then this movie may not be the best fit for you, or perhaps it would be more suitable for streaming at home. In any case, after a period of time that I was a bit under the weather, I'm happy that I was able to do this review, and if you like what I do here, please consider subscribing to my channel, and also clicking on that wonderful notification bell. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.